An act of shocking disrespect on a private jet soaring 40,000 feet above the Atlantic. A flight attendant, blinded by prejudice, delivers a sharp, stinging slap to the face of a passenger she deems unworthy. She sneers at the woman's simple clothes, her quiet demeanor, her very presence in this world of unimaginable luxury. But what she doesn't know is that the handprint now fading on her victim's cheek is an indictment, a career-ending mistake. Because the woman she just assaulted isn't a guess. She isn't a stowaway. She is Dr. Alani Sterling, the self-made billionaire who owns the very plane they're standing in. And the karma that's coming for this flight attendant is as swift and turbulent as a storm at cruising altitude. The air in the Teterboro Airport private terminal was a sterile, hushed whisper of wealth. It smelled of expensive leather, freshly brewed Sumatran coffee, and the faint, clean scent of jet fuel, the perfume of the global elite. It was a world Tiffany Blanchard had dedicated her life to serving, if not joining. Today, she was working the transatlantic leg on the Gulfstream G800, a marvel of aviation technology and bespoke luxury registered to Orion Executive Air. This wasn't just a charter. This was one of their flagship aircraft, reserved for their most discerning, high-net-worth clients. Tiffany smoothed the front of her tailored uniform, a deep navy blue pencil skirt, and a crisp white blouse with the golden Orion constellation embroidered on the collar. Her blonde hair was pulled back into a flawless chignon, not a single strand out of place. Her makeup was immaculate, her smile a carefully constructed mask of professional warmth. She was the picture of poise and perfection, a gatekeeper to the stratosphere. Her colleague, Catherine, a younger, less jaded flight attendant with kind eyes, was arranging a tray of chilled champagne flutes. Manifest says just one passenger today, a Dr. Sterling, heading to Geneva for the World Economic Forum pre-meetings. Dr. Sterling, Tiffany repeated, the name tasting unfamiliar. She mentally scrolled through her internal Rolodex of Forbes list regulars, tech moguls, and old money heirs. The name didn't register. Probably a specialist for one of the big players, a geologist for an oil baron, or a physician for some aging patriarch. We'll treat her like royalty, of course. The of course was laden with the implication that the passenger was royalty by association, not by right. A black Escalade pulled onto the tarmac, gliding to a stop near the jet's stairway. Tiffany stood at the top of the stairs, her smile fixed, ready to greet the client. The door of the SUV opened and her smile faltered, just for a fraction of a second, before her training kicked in and cemented it back in place. The woman who emerged was not what she expected. She was a black woman, perhaps in her late 30s, with her hair braided in intricate cornrows that cascaded over her shoulders. She wore no makeup, and her face, though striking with high cheekbones and intelligent, almond-shaped eyes, was etched with a subtle weariness. But it was her clothes that truly registered in Tiffany's meticulously judgmental mind. She wore a simple heather gray hoodie from a brand Tiffany didn't recognize, a pair of practical olive green cargo pants, and comfortable-looking hiking boots. She carried a single well-worn leather backpack slung over one shoulder. There had to be a mistake. This woman looked more like she was about to embark on a backpacking trip through Southeast Asia than attend a precursor to the most exclusive economic summit in the world. Perhaps she was an assistant, sent ahead to prepare things. "Welcome aboard," Tiffany said, her voice a pitch-perfect melody of hospitality that belied the discordant thoughts in her head. "May I take your bag for you?" The woman offered a small, tired smile. "Thank you, but I'll keep it with me." Her voice was a low, smooth alto, calm and measured. "I'm Alani Sterling." Tiffany's internal gears ground to a halt. This was the client? This plainly dressed woman was the one commanding a $65 million aircraft for a solo flight across the ocean? The dissonance was staggering. Tiffany had served heiresses draped in Chanel, tech billionaires in their signature Silicon Valley uniforms of $1,000 hoodies, and Russian oligarchs in tracksuits that cost more than her car. But there was always an aura, an unmistakable signal of immense wealth, a Patek Philippe watch, a rare handbag, an air of effortless entitlement. This woman, Alani Sterling, projected none of that. She projected quiet confidence, yes, but not the kind Tiffany associated with a 9-figure net worth. Of course, Dr. Sterling. A pleasure to have you with us. Tiffany recovered, her smile now feeling like a cheap veneer. Please, come this way. The cabin is prepared for you. Can I get you a glass of Dom Perignon before we depart? Just some water for now, please. Still, if possible, Alani replied, her eyes scanning the cabin. The interior of the G800 was a testament to understated opulence. Cream-colored cashmere seats, polished dark mahogany woodwork, and brushed platinum accents. It was designed to be a sanctuary in the sky. Alani walked through the cabin and chose a seat not in the main Club 4 arrangement, but a slightly smaller one further back, near a window. She placed her backpack on the seat beside her and pulled out a thick, dog-eared paperback novel. Tiffany exchanged a glance with Catherine. It was a look that said, "Can you believe this?" Catherine, however, merely gave a slight, non-committal shrug and went to fetch the requested water. Tiffany approached Alani, her posture ramrod straight. Dr. Sterling, the forward suite is much more spacious and comfortable, with a full divan if you wish to rest. We've prepared it especially for you. Thank you, this is perfect, Alani said without looking up from her book. The dismissal, though polite, pricked at Tiffany's ego. She wasn't just a servant, she was a curator of an experience. Her suggestions were meant to enhance the client's comfort, and being ignored felt like a slight. She retreated to the galley, her jaw tight. She's different, Catherine whispered, handing a crystal glass of Fiji water to Tiffany. Different is one word for it, Tiffany muttered, her voice low and sharp. She acts as if she's on a commercial flight, not a private jet she's supposedly paying $200,000 to charter. No champagne, no interest in the amenities. Hiding in the back with a book? She scoffed quietly. I've seen more excitement from lottery winners. The source of Tiffany's vitriol wasn't just snobbery, it was a deep-seated resentment. She had worked for Orion for 7 years, sacrificing holidays, relationships, and a normal life for the privilege of serving the world's most powerful people. She was drowning in student loan debt from a degree in hospitality management that had promised a life of glamour but delivered one of servitude. Her fiancé, Garrett, a personal trainer with expensive tastes and a fluctuating income, was constantly pressuring her about their finances. This job, with its glimpses into a world she desperately wanted to inhabit, was both her salvation and her daily torment. And Dr. Alani Sterling, with her simple clothes and quiet humility, was a walking, breathing insult to Tiffany's entire worldview. Wealth was supposed to be loud, ostentatious, and, if she was being honest with herself, white. This woman defied all the stereotypes Tiffany had carefully constructed to make sense of her world and her place within it. And for that, she found her utterly infuriating. As the jet taxied to the runway, Tiffany performed the safety briefing with a cold, robotic precision. Alani listened patiently, her eyes never leaving Tiffany's face, which only served to irritate the flight attendant more. It felt like she was being scrutinized, judged by this woman who had no right. The powerful Rolls-Royce engines spooled up, pressing them all back into their seats. The G800 hurtled down the runway and lifted into the gray New Jersey sky with breathtaking grace. They were on their way to Geneva. As the plane climbed through the clouds into the brilliant, unending sunshine of the upper atmosphere, a storm was brewing inside the cabin, far more dangerous than any weather pattern they might encounter over the Atlantic. And Tiffany Blanchard, consumed by her own bitter prejudices, was flying directly into its heart. Once they reached their cruising altitude of 41,000 feet, the cabin became a silent, pressurized bubble of tranquility. The hum of the engines was a distant, soothing drone. Catherine began preparing the catering, an exquisite selection of dishes from a Michelin-starred restaurant in Manhattan. Tiffany, however, found herself unable to settle. She kept glancing back at Alani, who was still engrossed in her book, seemingly oblivious to the luxury surrounding her. Tiffany's mind raced, constructing a narrative to explain the anomaly. Perhaps Dr. Sterling had won some sort of fellowship or grant that paid for the flight. A charity case, maybe. Or perhaps the real owner was a man, and this was his flavor of the month. A woman he was trying to impress by letting her use the jet. This last thought settled in her mind, feeling perversely plausible. It explained the lack of entitled behavior. She wasn't the source of the power. She was merely adjacent to it. This new narrative reestablished Tiffany's sense of superiority. She wasn't serving the power. She was serving a guest of the power, which in her twisted hierarchy made her the more permanent fixture in this world. Armed with this new conviction, her demeanor shifted from cold professionalism to outright condescension. She approached Alani's seat. "Dr. Sterling," she began, her tone laced with a syrupy, patronizing sweetness. "I'm sure this is all very exciting for you. If there's anything at all you're unfamiliar with, the entertainment system, the satellite phone, even the lavatory functions, please don't hesitate to ask. It can be a bit overwhelming for a first-timer." Alani finally looked up from her book, her calm, dark eyes meeting Tiffany's. She didn't seem offended, merely observant. "Thank you for the offer, but I'm quite comfortable. I've been on these before." The simple statement, delivered without a hint of arrogance, should have diffused Tiffany's theory. Instead, it fanned the flames. "Liar," she thought. "You've probably been on a charter once with your sugar daddy." "Of course," Tiffany replied, her smile not reaching her eyes. "Well, the chef has prepared a wonderful 5-course meal for your flight. We have a seared ahi tuna with a mango salsa to start, followed by a wild mushroom consomme." "That sounds lovely," Alani said, "but I'm not very hungry. A simple ginger ale would be perfect if you have it." Ginger ale. On a flight provisioned with vintage wines, top-shelf liquor, and gourmet cuisine, she wanted a simple soda. To Tiffany, it was another piece of evidence. This woman had no class, no understanding of the privilege she was being afforded. It was like giving a priceless painting to a child who only wanted to draw on it with crayons. "Certainly," Tiffany said, her voice tight. She returned to the galley, slamming the small refrigerator door with more force than necessary. "Is everything all right?" Catherine asked, pausing her meticulous arrangement of a cheese board. "She wants a ginger ale," Tiffany spat, as if it were a profanity. "She's treating this $65 million jet like a budget airline. I'm telling you, Kate, something is not right with this passenger. She's not who she says she is." "She seems perfectly pleasant to me," Catherine countered gently. "Maybe she just has simple tastes. Or maybe she's not feeling well." "Or maybe she's an imposter," Tiffany retorted, pouring the ginger ale into a crystal tumbler with such vigor that it foamed over the top. She wiped the glass with a linen napkin, her movements sharp and angry. She delivered the drink to Alani, placing it on the polished mahogany inlay next to her, with a definitive click. Alani murmured her thanks and took a small sip, her attention already returning to her book. The casual indifference was maddening. Tiffany felt invisible, unappreciated. She was a world-class service professional, and she was being treated like an automaton. An hour later, as they flew over the coast of Newfoundland, the plane hit a patch of unexpected turbulence. It wasn't dangerous. The G800 was built to handle far worse. But it was jarring. The aircraft shuddered, and a series of bumps sent a tremor through the cabin. The seatbelt sign pinged on. Tiffany, who was standing in the aisle, instinctively braced herself. Alani, however, didn't even flinch. She simply placed her half-full glass of ginger ale into the secure cup holder, her movements fluid and unhurried. When the worst of the bumps had passed, Tiffany saw her opportunity to reassert her authority. She walked over, her face a mask of feigned concern. "That was a bit rough, wasn't it?" she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "You must have been frightened. It's quite different from flying commercial, where you're packed in with so many other people. It can feel much more intense when you're all alone." Alani marked her page with a leather bookmark and closed the book, giving Tiffany her full attention for the first time. Her gaze was steady, unnervingly direct. "I wasn't frightened," she said, her voice even. "I have my pilot's license. I understand the dynamics of atmospheric pressure and wind shear. It was moderate turbulence. This aircraft is handling it beautifully." Tiffany froze. "A pilot's license?" The statement was so unexpected, so contrary to the image she had built in her head, that she could only process it as a lie, a pathetic attempt to seem more important than she was. The audacity was breathtaking. A cruel laugh escaped her lips, short and sharp. "A pilot's license? That's a good one. Did you get it out of a cereal box?" The moment the words left her mouth, she knew she had crossed a line. The professional veneer had cracked, revealing the ugly prejudice beneath. Catherine, who had overheard from the galley, looked horrified. Alani's expression didn't change, but a new cold stillness settled in her eyes. It was the calm at the center of a hurricane. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't get angry. She simply held Tiffany's gaze. "That was an inappropriate thing to say," Alani stated, "not as an accusation, but as a simple, undeniable fact." Instead of apologizing, Tiffany doubled down, her insecurity and resentment boiling over into outright aggression. "What's inappropriate is you, pretending to be something you're not. I don't know who you are or how you managed to get on this flight, but the act is wearing thin. People like you don't belong here." "People like me?" Alani repeated, her voice now dangerously quiet. "What kind of people are those, Tiffany?" The use of her name, which was clearly printed on her name tag, felt like a deliberate, personal strike. "You know exactly what I mean," Tiffany hissed, her face flushed. She leaned in closer, invading Alani's personal space. "This world has rules. It has a certain look, a certain code of conduct. You waltz in here with your cheap clothes and your pilot fantasies, drinking your ginger ale, and you think you can fool us? You think you can fool me?" Every word was a new shovel of dirt on her own professional grave, but she was too blinded by rage to see it. She felt a surge of power, the thrill of finally saying what she thought, of putting this imposter in her place. The quiet, dignified woman in front of her represented everything that frustrated Tiffany about her own life. The feeling that others were getting ahead without playing by the rules, without earning it the way she felt she had. Catherine rushed out from the galley. "Tiffany, stop it! That's enough!" But Tiffany waved her away, her eyes locked on Alani. "Stay out of this, Kate. It's time someone told her the truth." The turbulence had subsided. The plane was once again a pocket of serene calm, but inside the pressure had reached a breaking point. The storm was no longer brewing. It had arrived. The silence that followed Tiffany's tirade was thick and suffocating. It absorbed the low hum of the engines, the whisper of the recycled air, everything. Catherine stood frozen halfway between the galley and the seats, her face pale with shock. Alani Sterling remained perfectly still, her expression unreadable, her hands resting calmly in her lap. Her lack of a reaction was more unnerving to Tiffany than any outburst would have been. It was as if she were an entomologist observing a particularly unpleasant insect, curious but emotionally detached. This infuriating composure was the final straw. Tiffany's carefully constructed world was built on a foundation of reactions. Fawning gratitude from C-list celebrities, boisterous demands from tech bros, and polite deference from old money types. This woman gave her nothing. She refused to play her part in the drama Tiffany had orchestrated. "What's the matter?" Tiffany taunted, her voice a low, venomous sneer. "Cat got your tongue, or are you finally realizing you're in over your head?" Alani slowly unfolded her hands. "I am going to ask you one time, and one time only, to step away from my seat and return to your duties," she said. Her voice was devoid of emotion, a flat, hard statement of intent. It was not a request, it was a command. The sheer authority in that tone, coming from the woman she had dismissed as a charity case, should have been a red alert. It was the voice of a CEO addressing a failing subordinate, a general addressing a mutinous soldier. But Tiffany was too far gone, adrift in a sea of her own making. She heard the command not as a warning, but as a challenge. "Your duties," Tiffany scoffed, a bubble of hysterical laughter escaping her lips. "My duty is to ensure the comfort and safety of the client. And right now, I have serious concerns about who you are and why you're on this aircraft. For all I know, you could be a threat." It was a wild, baseless accusation, a desperate attempt to frame her prejudice as professional concern. A threat? Alani's eyebrows raised a fraction of an inch. It was the most emotion she had shown thus far. "The only threat in this cabin, Tiffany, is your startling lack of professionalism and your unhinged behavior." "How dare you?" Tiffany hissed, her body trembling with rage. All the frustrations of her life, the debt, the dead-end relationship with Garrett, the 7 years of forced smiles and swallowed insults, coalesced into a single, white-hot point of fury directed at this calm, unimpressed woman. You come onto this plane, my workplace, and you disrespect me. You disrespect the company. You disrespect the actual owner of this jet who was generous enough to let you ride on it. I need to speak with the pilot, Alani interrupted, her voice cutting through Tiffany's rant like a surgeon's scalpel. She reached for the small call button on her armrest. I am officially requesting that you be removed from service for the remainder of this flight. Tiffany saw the motion of Alani's hand, the deliberate press of the button, and something inside her snapped. The final fragile thread of her self-control disintegrated. It was an act of defiance, an assertion of power from the person she had deemed powerless. It was unacceptable. In a motion that was shockingly swift, she lunged forward. Don't you dare, she snarled. Her hand swung through the air, the crack of it connecting with Alani's cheek echoing through the cabin like a gunshot. Time seemed to stop. The sound was sharp, ugly, and irrefutable. Alani's head turned slightly from the impact. A faint red mark began to blossom on her dark skin. She didn't cry out. She didn't gasp. She simply closed her eyes for a moment, as if absorbing the shock, the insult, the sheer violation of the act. Catherine let out a choked cry. Oh my God, Tiffany! What did you do? Tiffany stood panting, her hand tingling from the impact. The red haze of her rage began to clear, replaced by a cold, creeping dread. The silence was now accusatory. The polished mahogany, the cashmere seats, the entire $65 million aircraft seemed to be a silent witness to her career suicide. She stared at the red mark on Alani's face, a mark she had put there. Alani opened her eyes. They were no longer calm or observant. They were like chips of obsidian, hard and unforgiving. She slowly raised a hand, not to her cheek, but to the intercom speaker on the ceiling. The call button she had pressed moments before had already chimed in the cockpit. A calm male voice crackled through the speaker. This is Captain Hayes. Is everything all right back there? Before Tiffany or the horrified Catherine could utter a word, Alani spoke. Her voice was perfectly steady, but it carried a new weight, an Arctic chill that seemed to drop the temperature in the cabin by several degrees. Captain Hayes, she said, her tone formal and clear. This is Dr. Sterling. I have a situation in the main cabin. One of your flight attendants, Miss Tiffany Blanchard, has just physically assaulted me. The silence from the cockpit was brief but profound. The words hung in the air. Physically assaulted me. It was a point of no return. Understood, Dr. Sterling. Captain Hayes's voice returned, now stripped of its earlier casualness. It was all business. I am on my way back. Do not move. Tiffany felt the blood drain from her face. Her legs felt weak, and she had to brace herself against the seat to keep from collapsing. The reality of what she had done crashed down on her with the force of a physical blow. She hadn't just insulted a passenger. She hadn't just broken company policy. She had committed an act of violence at 41,000 feet against a client on one of the most exclusive private jets in the world. She looked at Alani, whose face was a stony mask. The quiet woman in the gray hoodie was gone. In her place was someone else, someone with an aura of immense untapped power. I didn't, Tiffany stammered, her voice a pathetic whisper. You provoked me. You were being difficult. Alani ignored her completely, her gaze fixed on the cockpit door at the front of the cabin. She was done speaking to Tiffany. The matter was now in other hands. Catherine, finally finding her voice, rushed to Alani's side. Dr. Sterling, are you all right? Can I get you some ice? Her voice trembled. I'm fine, Catherine, Alani said, her voice softening ever so slightly as she addressed the younger attendant. Thank you for your concern. The click of the cockpit door unlocking was the loudest sound Tiffany had ever heard. It was the sound of a guillotine being released. The door swung open, and Captain Gregory Hayes, a tall, imposing man with silvering hair and a stern, no-nonsense expression, stepped into the cabin. His eyes, trained to assess critical situations in an instant, took in the scene. Catherine hovering worriedly, Tiffany standing pale and terrified, and Dr. Alani Sterling, sitting with quiet dignity, a red handprint blazing on her cheek. His gaze settled on Tiffany, and in that single look, she saw the end of her career, her ambitions, her entire life as she knew it. Captain Gregory Hayes was a man who had seen almost everything in his 30 years of flying. He had navigated through terrifying storms, handled engine failures over the open ocean, and managed medical emergencies in the middle of nowhere. His defining characteristic was an unshakable calm under pressure. But as he stood in the doorway between the cockpit and the cabin, the scene before him ignited a cold, professional fury he hadn't felt in years. His eyes swept the cabin once more, his mind processing the data points with the speed of a flight computer. Catherine's distress was genuine. Tiffany's panicked guilt was written all over her face, and the red mark on Dr. Sterling's cheek was irrefutable proof of a catastrophic failure on his aircraft. His responsibility wasn't just to fly the plane, it was to ensure the safety and well-being of everyone on board, especially the client. He walked down the aisle, his polished black shoes making no sound on the thick carpet. He stopped directly in front of Alani's seat, deliberately ignoring Tiffany for the moment. "Dr. Sterling," he said, his voice a low, respectful baritone, "I am Captain Gregory Hayes. Are you injured? Do you require medical attention?" "I am not, Captain. Thank you for your swift response," Alani replied. Her composure was absolute. It was the composure of someone who was not a victim, but an authority figure assessing a breach in her own command chain. Captain Hayes nodded, his gaze briefly flicking to the mark on her cheek. "I understand you were assaulted by a member of my crew." "That is correct," Alani confirmed. The captain turned his head slowly, his eyes finally landing on Tiffany. The look he gave her was one of pure, undiluted contempt. "Ms. Blanchard, report to the forward galley. Now." Tiffany, who had been frozen in place, flinched as if he had struck her. "Captain, It was a misunderstanding," she stammered, her mind grasping for any possible excuse, any way to rewind the last 5 minutes. "That was not a request," Captain Hayes said, his voice dropping to a near whisper that was somehow more menacing than a shout. "Move!" Numbly, Tiffany stumbled toward the front of the plane, her legs unsteady. She felt the weight of every eye on her. Even the inanimate platinum fixtures seemed to mock her. She collapsed onto the small crew jump seat in the galley, her head in her hands, the magnitude of her error finally crashing down. Captain Hayes turned his attention back to Alani. "Ma'am, on behalf of Orion Executive Air, I want to offer my most profound and sincere apologies. This is an unforgivable breach of conduct, and I assure you it will be dealt with in the severest terms." "I appreciate that, Captain," Alani said. It was then that Tiffany, eavesdropping from the galley, heard the words that would vaporize the last vestiges of her flawed narrative. The words that would reconfigure her entire understanding of the situation, snapping the universe back into an order she couldn't have imagined, one where she was not the gatekeeper, but a trespasser who had just defiled a sacred space. Captain Hayes continued, "I've already been in communication with Orion's head office via satellite link. They are, of course, horrified. Mr. Beaumont himself sends his deepest apologies and wants to know if there's anything he can do." Tiffany's blood ran cold. Robert Beaumont was the founder and CEO of Orion Executive Air, a legendary, almost mythical figure in the private aviation industry. He was personally apologizing for what Tiffany had assumed was an issue with a guest, a +1. "Please extend my regards to Robert," Alani said calmly. "Tell him I'm fine, but that we will need to have a serious conversation about his company's hiring and training protocols when I return." The casual way she said it, "Tell him I'm fine, a conversation with Robert," sent a shockwave through Tiffany's system. It was the tone one used with a colleague, an equal. Captain Hayes nodded grimly. "Of course, Dr. Sterling. He's already clearing his schedule." He then paused, his expression turning grave. "Ms. Blanchard has been relieved of her duties, effective immediately. She will be confined to the crew rest area for the remainder of the flight. Upon landing in Geneva, she will be met by airport security and our company's regional director. Her employment is terminated." From the galley, Tiffany let out an involuntary gasp. Terminated, met by security. It was a nightmare. But the worst was yet to come. The final, devastating piece of the puzzle fell into place with the captain's next statement. He looked at Alani with a mixture of professional deference and utter bewilderment at his crew's failure. Dr. Sterling, he said, his voice filled with a pained sincerity. I am so sorry this happened on your aircraft. Tiffany's mind snagged on the last two words. Your aircraft. Not the aircraft. Not this aircraft. Your aircraft. It couldn't be. It was impossible. She scrambled to her feet, stumbling out of the galley, her face a mask of disbelief. What did you say? She whispered, her voice hoarse. Captain Hayes turned to her, his eyes blazing with incandescent rage. Have you completely lost your mind, Ms. Blanchard? Or are you truly this ignorant? You are standing on the Odyssey, Registry N71AS. The AS stands for Alani Sterling. This is Dr. Alani Sterling's plane. She owns it. We, Orion Executive Air, are contracted to manage and staff it for her. This is not a charter. You are not on an Orion jet. You are a guest employee in Dr. Sterling's home, and you have just assaulted the owner. The world tilted on its axis. Every sneer, every condescending remark, every vile assumption Tiffany had made replayed in her mind, now cast in the horrifying glow of the truth. The simple clothes, the lack of pretension, the ginger ale. It wasn't a lack of class. It was the quiet confidence of someone who had absolutely nothing to prove to anyone, least of all a flight attendant. The woman she had mocked, belittled, and ultimately struck was not a guest, not an imposter, not a charity case. She was the billionaire, the quiet tech genius who had founded Etheria Innovations, the revolutionary company at the forefront of carbon capture technology, the philanthropist, the pilot, the owner of everything around her. Tiffany swayed, her vision tunneling. She looked at Alani, truly seeing her for the first time. She saw the immense quiet power she had mistaken for weakness. She saw the patience she had mistaken for ignorance. And she saw the cold, hard finality in her eyes. No, Tiffany breathed, the word a fragile puff of air. No, it can't be. Catherine, the captain commanded, his voice like cracking ice. Escort Ms. Blanchard to the crew rest compartment. Ensure she remains there until we are on the ground. Catherine, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and pity, gently took Tiffany's arm. Tiffany didn't resist. She was completely broken. As she was led away like a prisoner, she looked back one last time at Dr. Alani Sterling. The billionaire hadn't moved. She had already picked up her book and was calmly opening it to her bookmark page, as if the person who had just imploded her life had already ceased to exist. The remainder of the flight passed in a blur of surreal silence for Tiffany. Confined to the small, windowless crew rest area, she could only hear the faint hum of the engines carrying her toward her doom. Each nautical mile covered was another step closer to a future she couldn't bear to imagine. The space felt like a coffin, a premature burial for the life she had so carefully, if misguidedly, tried to build. She alternated between numb disbelief and gut-wrenching waves of panic. The slap replayed in her mind, not as an act of power, but as a pathetic, desperate flailing that had cost her everything. Upon landing at Geneva Airport, the jet didn't taxi to the VIP terminal. Instead, under instruction from the ground, it was directed to a remote, isolated stand. As the engine spooled down, the silence was absolute. Tiffany could hear the click of the main cabin door being unlatched. She didn't have to see it to know what was happening. A sleek, black Mercedes was waiting on the tarmac to whisk Dr. Sterling away to her meetings, to a life of consequence and power that Tiffany had only ever glimpsed through a cabin window. A few minutes later, Captain Hayes opened the door to her compartment. His face was grim, his eyes holding no trace of sympathy. "They're here for you," he said. Two uniformed Swiss airport security officers and a stern-looking man in a tailored suit, the Orion regional director, were waiting in the cabin. No one spoke to her. She was an object to be processed, a problem to be removed. As she was escorted down the stairs onto the tarmac, the cold Swiss air felt like a slap, a grim echo of her own violence. She was walked across the concrete to a sterile, unmarked van. It felt like a perp walk. She was taken not to a police station. Dr. Sterling had apparently not pressed criminal charges, a fact that felt less like mercy and more like an indication of how little Tiffany now mattered, but to a small, featureless office in the airport's administrative building. The regional director, a man named Henri Dubois, finally spoke. His English was perfect, his tone glacial. Ms. Blanchard, your employment with Orion Executive Air is terminated, effective immediately, for gross misconduct. You have violated every core principle of our company. You are a disgrace to our uniform. He slid a tablet across the table, showing a termination agreement. This includes a non-disclosure clause. You will not speak of Dr. Sterling, this flight, or the events that transpired to anyone. Violation will result in severe legal penalties. But my things, she mumbled, thinking of her locker back in Teterboro. Your personal effects will be packaged and mailed to your last known address, Dubois said dismissively. Your final paycheck will be withheld pending a damage assessment. Damage? There was no damage, she cried. The damage to our relationship with one of our most important clients is incalculable, he retorted, his voice sharp. You are blacklisted, not just from Orion but from the industry. We have a network. No reputable private or commercial airline will hire you. Your career in aviation is over. He left the room, leaving her with the document. Over. The word echoed in the silent room. She signed it, her hands shaking. She was then escorted out of the airport through a staff exit, her crew credentials confiscated, and left on a curb to wait for a taxi, a pariah in a foreign city. Her first call was to her fiancé, Garrett. She needed comfort, reassurance, a plan. She dialed his number, her heart pounding with a desperate hope. He answered on the fourth ring, sounding annoyed. Tiff, what's up? It's like 4 a.m. here. Through choked sobs, she explained what had happened. She left out the slap, painting herself as the victim of a misunderstanding, a difficult passenger who had powerful connections. So you got fired? Garrett's voice was flat, devoid of sympathy. Seriously? Over some rude passenger? I thought you were good at your job. I am. It wasn't my fault, she lied, the words tasting like ash. She was looking for a reason. Garrett, I don't know what to do. My career is over. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Well, that's not good, Tiff. The rent is due next week, and I was counting on your paycheck for the payment on the BMW. The cold, practical nature of his response hit her harder than anything Dubois had said. He wasn't asking if she was okay. He was worried about the bills. The BMW? Garrett, I just lost my entire life. Who cares about the car? I care, he shot back, his voice rising. This is a disaster. What are we supposed to do? I can't cover everything on my own. You were the one with the stable, high-paying job. The conversation devolved from there. By the time she hung up, the last illusion of her life, a supportive partnership, had been shattered. She wasn't part of a team. She had been a financial asset, and her value had just plummeted to zero. The next few weeks were a descent into a personal hell. She flew back to the States on a cramped commercial flight, a brutal reminder of the world she had so long looked down upon. When she got back to the apartment she shared with Garrett, the atmosphere was toxic. He was distant, resentful. The arguments became constant, always circling back to money. Within a month, he told her to pack her things. He had found someone else, a woman with a more stable future. She was forced to move into a tiny, rundown apartment in a bad neighborhood, paid for with the last of her savings. Her attempts to find a new job were met with a wall of silence. The blacklist was real. Her resume, once a passport to a world of luxury, was now radioactive. She applied for jobs in hospitality, hotels, high-end restaurants, but her specialized experience on private jets didn't translate well, and the few interviews she landed went nowhere. She ended up taking a job as a waitress at a soulless airport diner, serving greasy food to weary travelers, wearing a cheap, ill-fitting polyester uniform. Every day was a torment. She would watch the sleek private jets take off and land at the nearby executive airport, each one a gleaming symbol of the paradise she had lost. She saw flight attendants in their crisp, tailored uniforms, and the sight would fill her with a venomous cocktail of envy and self-loathing. She had been one of them. She had been a queen in that world. Now she was clearing half-eaten plates and wiping up spilled coffee, earning in a week what she used to make in a single flight. Her once manicured nails were chipped, her flawless chignon replaced by a simple, greasy ponytail. The mask of perfection had crumbled, revealing the desperate, bitter person beneath. This, she thought, was her karma. This was her punishment. But she had no idea it was only the beginning. The architect of her downfall was far from finished. Dr. Alani Sterling sat in the Geneva office of her family foundation, a minimalist space of glass and steel overlooking the placid waters of Lake Geneva. The World Economic Forum pre-meetings had been productive, but her mind was elsewhere. The incident on the flight was more than just an unpleasant encounter. It was a symptom of a sickness she had encountered too many times in her life. The corrosive prejudice that judged a person's worth by the color of their skin or the perceived price tag of their clothes. She was not a vengeful person by nature. Her success was built on logic, data, and a relentless drive to solve problems, not on emotional reactivity. The slap had been shocking, but the casual, systemic bigotry that led to it was what truly disturbed her. Firing Tiffany Blanchard was a necessary and immediate consequence, but it was like treating a single symptom while ignoring the disease. It did nothing to prevent the next Tiffany from doing the same thing to someone else. Her executive assistant and chief of staff, Samuel Vance, a sharp, impeccably dressed man in his early 40s, stood before her holding a tablet. "The internal report from Orion just came through," he said. "They are, to put it mildly, groveling. Robert Beaumont has called me 5 times. They've offered to waive their management fees for the next 2 years." "That's a bandage, not a cure," Alani said, her gaze distant. "I'm not interested in their money. I'm interested in change. What do we know about Tiffany Blanchard?" Samuel swiped through the screen. 29 years old, 7 years with Orion, exemplary record on paper. No official complaints, which is interesting. Lives in New Jersey, engaged to a personal trainer named Garrett Cole. Significant personal debt, according to a preliminary financial background check we ran. She appears to live a lifestyle well beyond her means. "Dig deeper, Sam," Alani instructed. "I don't want the official record. I want the unofficial one. Social media, online forums, anything that gives us a clearer picture of her mindset. And I want you to look into Orion's HR files. I find it hard to believe she's never shown these colors before. People like that don't just snap out of nowhere. There's always a history, a pattern." Samuel, a master of discreet and thorough investigation, got to work. What he uncovered over the next 48 hours was both damning and illuminating. Tiffany Blanchard, it turned out, maintained a semi-private blog and a curated Instagram account under a pseudonym. It was a shrine to a life she aspired to but didn't have. Posts of designer handbags, likely fakes, filtered selfies in glamorous locations she visited for work, and platitudes about hustle and living your best life. But laced throughout the aspirational content was a darker thread. There were thinly veiled racist jokes, resentful posts about undeserving people getting ahead, and comments on news articles that revealed a deep-seated prejudice against minorities and a particular disdain for successful Black women. She was a member of several private online groups dedicated to complaining about difficult clients, where the language was often overtly racist and classist. The investigation into Orion Executive Air was even more revealing. Samuel, using a top-tier corporate intelligence firm, managed to connect with 2 former Orion flight attendants who had left the company. They told stories of an internal culture that unofficially tolerated discriminatory behavior as long as it wasn't directed at the primary, paying client. Microaggressions against guests of clients, particularly people of color, were often ignored. They spoke of a look the other way policy, where complaints against senior attendants like Tiffany were often buried by management to avoid rocking the boat. Tiffany had never been formally disciplined because no one with enough power to make it stick had ever been her target. Until now. Eleni reviewed the file Samuel prepared. It was a detailed portrait of a bitter, prejudiced woman enabled by a corporate culture of complacency. This was no longer just about Tiffany Blanchard. It was about Orion. "They didn't just hire a bad apple," Eleni said, her voice cold. "They cultivated an orchard that was bound to produce one." "What are your instructions, Dr. Sterling?" Samuel asked. "First, the personal matter," Alani began. "Tiffany Blanchard's online persona needs to see the light of day. Anonymously leak the screenshots from her blog and the private groups. Not to the mainstream media, but to industry-specific forums and social justice blogs that focus on the service and aviation industries. Let her peers be the ones to judge her. Let the world see the ugliness she hides behind her professional smile. She paused. And the fiancé, Garrett Cole. His gym's primary investors are a venture capital firm, correct? Yes, Samuel confirmed. Vanguard Equity Partners. I know one of their senior partners, Arthur Kensington, Alani said. Arrange a lunch for me when I get back to New York. I have a story he might find interesting about the kind of character his firm is backing. This was the strategic, targeted karma that Alani architected. It wasn't a blanket carpet bombing of a life. It was a series of precise, surgical strikes designed to dismantle the structures built on prejudice and entitlement. Now for Orion, she continued, her focus shifting to the larger target. Forget the waived fees. We're filing a lawsuit, not for the slap. That's too personal. We're suing them for breach of contract, citing negligent hiring practices and fostering a discriminatory corporate environment that directly led to a hostile and unsafe situation for their client. We'll use the testimony from the former employees and the lack of any meaningful diversity training in their protocols as evidence. Samuel's eyes lit up. That will cripple them. Their reputation is everything. Exactly, Alani said. But I don't want to destroy them, Sam. I want to remake them. The lawsuit is the leverage. Once we file, Robert Beaumont will be desperate to settle, and our terms will not be financial. She stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the mountains. Here's what we're going to demand in the settlement. First, a complete overhaul of their HR and training protocols, overseen by a diversity, equity, and inclusion firm of my choosing. Second, the establishment of a multi-million-dollar scholarship and mentorship program funded by Orion to help people from underrepresented communities pursue careers as pilots, flight attendants, and aviation mechanics. We'll call it the Wings of Opportunity Initiative. Third, a public, formal apology from Robert Beaumont, not to me, but to the entire industry, acknowledging their failures and outlining their commitment to change. This was the masterstroke. Alani wasn't just seeking punishment. She was using her power, her resources, and her intelligence to force a systemic change. She was turning an act of personal ugliness into an opportunity for widespread good. The slap would become the catalyst for a revolution in the private aviation industry. And one more thing, Sam, Alani said, turning back from the window. Find Catherine, the other flight attendant. Offer her a position, not on my flight crew, but here, with the foundation. I want her to help manage the new scholarship program. She showed integrity and compassion under pressure. That's the kind of person I want on my team. Samuel Vance smiled. It was a brilliant, comprehensive, and devastatingly effective plan. Consider it done, Dr. Sterling. The karma hitting Tiffany Blanchard was not some random twist of fate. It was a carefully designed, perfectly executed response from a woman who didn't just get mad. She got strategic, and the shockwaves were about to ripple through an entire industry. The fallout was not immediate, but it was absolute. The anonymous leak of Tiffany Blanchard's online history spread like a virus through the tight-knit world of aviation professionals. The blog posts filled with racist memes and resentful rants were juxtaposed with her polished professional photos. The hypocrisy was stark and repulsive. She was condemned in the court of public opinion by the very peers she had once looked down on. The wannabe influencer was exposed as a purveyor of hate, and her digital world crumbled into dust. Her personal world followed suit. The lunch between Dr. Alani Sterling and Arthur Kensington of Vanguard Equity Partners was, by all accounts, a quiet and civilized affair. But its consequences were seismic. 2 weeks later, Garrett Cole's gym underwent a restructuring. The venture capital firm pulled its funding, citing concerns about the brand image and personal character of its key personnel. The gym went bankrupt. The prized BMW was repossessed. Garrett, his own life in tatters, sent Tiffany a final, vitriolic text message blaming her for everything before disappearing from her life completely. Tiffany was now truly alone, working her dead-end diner job, haunted by the ghosts of her past. She saw her own story reflected in the faces of the people she served, people she would have once dismissed as beneath her, now the only human connection she had. The humiliation was a constant, grinding weight. She had flown at 40,000 feet, and now she was grounded in every conceivable way. Meanwhile, the lawsuit against Orion Executive Air hit the industry like a thunderclap. It was the talk of every boardroom and tarmac from Teterboro to Dubai. The allegations of a discriminatory culture, backed by damning evidence and the testimony of former employees, were a mortal threat to a business built on reputation and discretion. As Alani had predicted, Robert Beaumont didn't even let it get to discovery. He folded immediately, desperate to settle. The settlement was made public, and its terms were unprecedented. Orion issued a public apology that was humiliating in its detail, admitting to systemic failures. They announced the establishment of the Wings of Opportunity initiative, pledging $20 million to fund scholarships and training for minorities in aviation. The program would be administered independently by Dr. Sterling's foundation. Catherine, the flight attendant who had shown a moment of kindness, was stunned when she received the offer. She tearfully accepted the position to help run the initiative, trading her life in the air for a chance to make a lasting difference on the ground. She became a passionate advocate, her first-hand experience giving her a powerful voice for change. Orion, under the watchful eye of the DEI firm Alani had appointed, began the painful but necessary process of rebuilding its culture from the ground up. Months later, Dr. Alani Sterling was boarding the Odyssey for a flight to a clean energy summit in Kyoto. The new flight crew, provided by a chastened and reformed Orion, was led by a sharp, professional black woman who greeted her with genuine warmth and respect. The cabin felt different, lighter somehow. As the jet climbed into the stratosphere, Alani looked out the window at the curving blue expanse of the earth below. She thought back to that day, to the ugly moment of contact, the stinging on her cheek. An act born of ignorance and hate had been transformed, through strategy and resolve, into a force for positive change. Hundreds of young people would now have a chance to enter a field that might have otherwise been closed to them. A major corporation had been forced to confront its own ugliness and atone for it in a meaningful way. Tiffany Blanchard's life was in ruins, a direct consequence of her own actions. But Alani took no pleasure in it. Tiffany was a casualty of a system that fostered her worst instincts. Alani's victory wasn't in Tiffany's downfall, but in the slow, difficult work of ensuring that the system itself would be better for the next generation. She had absorbed a hateful blow and used its energy not to strike back, but to lift others up. That was her karma. That was her power. She picked up a new book, settled into her seat, and flew on into the future she was building. And so, a single hateful act born of prejudice became the unintended catalyst for a revolution. Tiffany Blanchard didn't just slap a woman, she slapped the sleeping giant of consequence, and the awakening shook an entire industry. This story serves as a powerful, real-world reminder that the person you look down on today could be the very one who owns the ground you're standing on tomorrow. It shows that true power isn't about flaunting wealth, but about using your influence to dismantle the very systems that allow prejudice to thrive. If this story of karmic justice and strategic change resonated with you, please hit that like button to let us know. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. We have more incredible stories about consequence, karma, and the hidden dynamics of power coming your way, and you won't want to miss a single one. Thank you for listening.